Dad discovers daughter talks to plants. A garden secret changes everything. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. In the quiet of the late afternoon, Daniel watched his daughter, Maya, from the kitchen window. She sat alone in the garden, her small hands brushing the leaves of an old oak tree, whispering secrets to the plants as if they were her closest friends. But it wasn't just a child's imagination at play. What she knew, what she whispered, was impossible. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as Maya turned to him, eyes wide with a knowledge no 6-year-old should possess, and said something that shattered the fragile peace he had clung to since his wife's passing. The plants had told her a secret only he and his late wife knew. What do you do when the innocence of a child reveals truths you've buried deep within? As Daniel confronts the growing fear that his daughter's whispers hold more than just childhood fantasies, he must unravel a mystery rooted in the past, buried in the soil, and nurtured by the very hands he once loved. Each word Maya utters brings them closer to a truth that could heal or destroy them both. But can Daniel face what the garden is trying to reveal before it's too late? The golden rays of the setting sun painted the quaint suburban backyard in warm hues, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. In this picturesque scene, 6-year-old Maya sat cross-legged on the soft grass, her dark curls framing a face of innocent concentration. Her small hands gently caressed the leaves of a nearby rosebush, her lips moving in a barely audible whisper. From the kitchen window, Daniel watched his daughter with a mixture of love and concern etched on his weary face. The past year had been a whirlwind of grief and adjustment since Sarah's passing, and he still struggled to navigate single parenthood. He sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, noticing how the sunlight caught the gold of his wedding band, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. Deciding to join Maya, Daniel stepped out onto the back porch. The wooden planks creaked under his feet, a sound that used to make Sarah joke about their home's character. The memory brought a fleeting smile to his face, quickly replaced by the familiar ache in his chest. "Hey, sweet pea," Daniel called softly, not wanting to startle Maya. "What are you up to out here?" Maya looked up, her big brown eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkling with excitement. "Daddy, I'm talking to the flowers. They have so many stories to tell." Daniel chuckled, lowering himself onto the grass beside her. "Is that so? And what are these chatty flowers saying?" Maya's face scrunched up in thought, her small fingers still stroking the rose petals. "They say the garden misses you, Daddy. And..." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say Mommy is sad because you don't visit with her anymore." Daniel felt as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. His heart pounded in his ears as he stared at his daughter, unable to process what he'd just heard. How could Maya possibly know about Sarah's love for this garden? They'd never discussed it, and Maya had been too young to remember the countless hours Sarah had spent tending to her beloved plants. What did you say, sweetie?" Daniel managed to stammer out, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked at him, confusion evident in her innocent gaze. "The flowers told me, Daddy. They say Mommy used to sing to them and tell them stories. Don't you remember?" Daniel's mind raced. Of course he remembered. Sarah's passion for gardening had been one of the things he'd fallen in love with. She'd spend hours out here, talking to the plants as if they were old friends. But they'd never told Maya about this. She couldn't possibly know. "Maya, honey?" Daniel began, trying to keep his voice steady. "How do you know these things about Mommy and the garden?" The little girl giggled, as if the answer was the most obvious thing in the world. "I told you, Daddy. The plants told me. They remember everything. They miss Mommy's songs, but they like when I talk to them too." A chill ran down Daniel's spine despite the warm evening air. He looked around the garden, suddenly seeing it through new eyes. The rose bushes Sarah had lovingly pruned, the herb garden she'd meticulously planned, the old oak tree they'd planted together when they first moved in all seemed to be watching him, whispering secrets he couldn't hear. What else do they tell you?" Daniel asked, his curiosity overcoming his disbelief. Maya's face lit up, eager to share her secret world. Oh, lots of things. The daisies told me about the picnic you and Mommy had here when you first moved in. And the big tree, she pointed to the oak. It remembers when you carved your names into its trunk. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The picnic, the carving, these were intimate moments he and Sarah had shared, long before Maya was born. There was no way she could know about them unless... No, it wasn't possible. And yet, as he looked at his daughter's earnest face, Daniel couldn't deny the truth in her words. Somehow, someway, Maya was communicating with the plants, unlocking memories and secrets hidden within the very soil of their backyard. As the realization washed over him, Daniel felt a mix of awe, fear, and a tiny spark of hope he hadn't felt in months. If Maya could truly speak to the plants, what other secrets might this garden hold? What messages might Sarah have left behind, never expecting they'd be heard? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Daniel shivered, suddenly aware of the cooling air and the enormity of what he'd just discovered. He looked at Maya, still chatting happily with the rosebush, and felt a surge of protective love mixed with a newfound uncertainty. "Come on, sweet pea," he said, standing up and offering his hand. "It's getting chilly. Let's head inside." As they walked back to the house, Daniel cast one last glance over his shoulder at the garden. In the fading light, he could have sworn he saw the leaves rustling, despite the lack of wind. The garden suddenly felt alive in a way it hadn't since Sarah's passing, full of whispered secrets and untold stories. Daniel closed the back door, his mind reeling. He had always thought of the garden as Sarah's legacy, a living reminder of her love and care. Now he realized it might be so much more. As he watched Maya happily coloring at the kitchen table, humming a tune he didn't recognize, Daniel knew that his life and his understanding of the world had just changed irrevocably. What other secrets did the garden hold? And more importantly, was he ready to hear them? The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting alternating stripes of light and shadow across the worn linoleum floor. Daniel stood at the counter, mechanically stirring his coffee, his mind 1,000 miles away from the mundane task at hand. It had been 3 days since Maya's startling revelation in the garden, and sleep had become an elusive luxury. Every time he closed his eyes, Daniel saw Sarah, her infectious laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, her hands lovingly tending to her precious plants. The memories, once a source of comfort, now felt tinged with an unsettling mystery. A cheerful humming broke through his reverie. Maya skipped into the kitchen, her curls bouncing with each step, a stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. "Morning, Daddy," she chirped, climbing onto a chair at the kitchen table. "Can I have Fruit Loops today?" Daniel managed to smile, pushing aside his troubled thoughts. "Sure thing, sweet pea. One bowl of sugar bombs coming right up." As he poured the cereal, Daniel watched Maya from the corner of his eye. She seemed so normal, so innocently unaware of the earth-shattering implications of her gift. How long had she been able to communicate with plants? And why hadn't he noticed before? "Hey Maya," Daniel began cautiously, sliding the bowl in front of her. "I was thinking we could spend some time in the garden today. Would you like that?" Maya's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Really? Oh yes, please. The daffodils told me they're going to bloom soon, and I want to see." Daniel's hand froze midway to his coffee mug. "The daffodils? Told you?" Maya nodded enthusiastically, milk dribbling down her chin. "Aha! They're excited because it's their first time. The older flowers are helping them." A chill ran down Daniel's spine despite the warm spring morning. He'd planted those daffodil bulbs with Sarah last fall, just weeks before everything changed. It was supposed to be a surprise for Maya, a burst of bright yellow to welcome the new season. That's great, honey," Daniel managed, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. "Finish up your breakfast, and we'll head out." 30 minutes later, father and daughter stepped into the backyard. The garden, which had always been Sarah's pride and joy, seemed to come alive with their presence. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Maya immediately ran to the far corner where the daffodils were planted, kneeling down to examine the green shoots poking through the soil. Daniel followed more slowly, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape as if seeing it for the first time. "Look, Daddy," Maya exclaimed, pointing excitedly. "They're coming up just like they said." Sure enough, tiny yellow buds were visible among the green stems. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, marveling at the sight. "They're beautiful, Sweet Pea. Your mom would have loved to see this." Maya's face softened, a wisdom beyond her years flickering in her eyes. "She does see it, Daddy. The flowers remember her. They say she's always here." Daniel's breath caught in his throat, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He wanted so desperately to believe it was true, that some part of Sarah lingered in this garden she'd loved so much. As Maya continued her animated conversation with the plants, Daniel's gaze drifted to the old oak tree dominating the center of the yard. He and Sarah had planted it together when they first moved in, a symbol of their new life and growing love. Now, its branches seemed to reach out to him, as if beckoning him closer. Almost in a trance, Daniel approached the tree. Its rough bark was familiar under his fingertips as he traced the outline of the heart he and Sarah had carved so many years ago. But as his hand moved lower, he felt something different, a small, unnatural protrusion near the base of the trunk. Frowning, Daniel knelt down, brushing away loose dirt and debris. There, partially hidden by an exposed root, was a small metal box. His heart pounding, Daniel pried it free, his hands shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried rose petals, was a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Daniel opened it, immediately recognizing Sarah's flowing handwriting. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, it means our little girl's gift has bloomed, just like we always suspected it would. There's so much I need to tell you, so many secrets hidden in this garden of ours. But remember, my love, not all that's buried should be unearthed. Some truths are better left to rest among the roots. All my love, always and forever, Sarah." Daniel stared at the letter, his mind reeling. Sarah had known about Maya's ability, and what secrets could be so dire that they were better left hidden. "Daddy!" Maya's voice startled him. She stood a few feet away, her head tilted in curiosity. "The old tree says you found Mommy's surprise. He's been keeping it safe for a long time." Daniel looked from the letter to his daughter, then back to the sprawling garden around them. Suddenly, the peaceful oasis Sarah had cultivated felt like a minefield of hidden truths and unspoken words. As the breeze picked up, rustling through the leaves with an almost whispered urgency, Daniel realized that his journey into the heart of this mysterious garden and the secrets it held had only just begun. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the Callahan family's backyard. Daniel sat on the worn wooden bench near the rose bushes, Sarah's letter clutched tightly in his trembling hands. He had read and reread the words countless times, each pass revealing new layers of mystery and raising more questions than answers. Maya's laughter drifted across the garden, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Daniel's mind. He watched as his daughter danced among the flowers, her small hands gently caressing petals and leaves. The innocence of the scene belied the earth-shattering revelations of the past few days. "Maya, sweetheart," Daniel called, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Can you come here for a moment?" The little girl skipped over, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Daddy, the tulips just told me the funniest joke. Want to hear it?" Daniel forced a smile, patting the bench beside him. "Maybe later, honey. Right now, I need to ask you something important." Maya's expression grew serious as she climbed onto the bench. "Is it about Mommy's letter?" Daniel's breath caught in his throat. You know about the letter?" Maya nodded solemnly. "The old oak tree told me. He said it was a special secret, just for you." Struggling to maintain his composure, Daniel unfolded the letter. "Sweet Pea, your mom wrote something here about you having a gift, about talking to plants. How long have you been able to do this?" Maya's brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't know, Daddy. I've always been able to hear them. Didn't you know? The simple question hit Daniel like a physical blow. How could he not have known? Had he been so wrapped up in his own grief that he'd failed to see the extraordinary ability blossoming in his own daughter? No, honey, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. Maya's small hand reached out to pat his arm comfortingly. It's okay, Daddy. Mommy knew. She used to talk to the plants with me all the time. A fresh wave of grief washed over Daniel. All those times he'd seen Sarah and Maya giggling in the garden together, he'd assumed it was just a mother and daughter sharing a love of nature. Now he realized it had been so much more. Maya, Daniel began hesitantly, your mom's letter mentions secrets in the garden. Have the plants told you anything about these secrets? The little girl's eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. The flowers sometimes whisper about things they're not supposed to tell. They say it makes them sad. Daniel leaned in, his heart racing. What kind of things, sweet pea? Maya bit her lip, looking around as if the plants might overhear. They talk about a big mistake, something that happened before I was born, and about someone named Elena. The roses get really quiet when they mention her name. Elena. The name hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Memories he'd long buried came rushing back. A face he'd tried so hard to forget. A voice that once meant everything to him. Daddy. Maya's worried voice broke through his thoughts. Are you okay? You look sad. Daniel blinked, realizing his cheeks were wet with tears. I'm all right, honey. It's just, there's a lot I need to think about. As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the garden, causing the leaves to rustle with an almost urgent whisper. Maya cocked her head, listening intently. The plants say there's more to find, Daddy, she said, her voice taking on an oddly mature tone. They say the truth is buried deep, but it wants to grow. Daniel stared at his daughter, a chill running down his spine despite the warm evening air. The weight of unspoken secrets seemed to press down on him, threatening to suffocate him with their intensity. Standing abruptly, Daniel took Maya's hand. Come on, sweet pea. It's getting late. Let's head inside. As they walked towards the house, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the garden was watching them. The flowers seemed to turn their heads, following their progress. The old oak tree's branches swayed, despite the lack of wind, as if waving goodbye or perhaps offering a warning. Once inside, Daniel busied himself with making dinner, his mind racing. Elena. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to think of her. The guilt, the shame, the heartache, all came flooding back in a torrent of emotion. As he mechanically chopped vegetables, Daniel's gaze drifted to the window overlooking the backyard. In the fading light, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing near the oak tree, a slender silhouette with flowing hair that looked achingly familiar. Daniel blinked, and the apparition vanished. But the unease remained, settling in his stomach like a lead weight. What other secrets lay buried in the soil of their backyard? And more importantly, was he prepared for the truths that might be unearthed? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the now silent garden, Daniel realized that his journey into the past and the painful secrets it held had only just begun. The whispers of the leaves carried promises of revelations to come, and Daniel knew that his life and his understanding of the woman he thought he knew so well would never be the same again. The early morning mist clung to the grass like a gossamer veil, shrouding the Callahans' backyard in an ethereal glow. Daniel stood on the back porch, a steaming mug of coffee clutched in his hands, his eyes fixed on the old oak tree that dominated the center of the yard. Sleep had eluded him once again, his mind a tumultuous sea of questions and half-formed theories. Maya's words from the previous evening echoed in his head. The plants say there's more to find, Daddy. They say the truth is buried deep, but it wants to grow. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped off the porch. The damp grass crunched softly under his feet as he made his way towards the oak tree. Its gnarled branches seemed to reach out to him, beckoning him closer. As he approached, Daniel's eyes were drawn to a patch of disturbed earth near the base of the trunk. It was subtle, just a slight discoloration and unevenness in the soil, but it was enough to make his heart race. Glancing back at the house to ensure Maya was still asleep, Daniel knelt down. With trembling hands, he began to dig, his fingers sinking into the cool, damp earth. It didn't take long before his efforts were rewarded. His hands struck something solid, and with a mixture of anticipation and dread, Daniel carefully unearthed a small wooden box. It was weathered and stained with age, but the intricate carvings on its surface were still visible, delicate flowers and vines that seemed to twist and bloom before his eyes. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the box. It had been a gift from Elena all those years ago, a gift he thought he'd buried along with his memories of her. With shaking hands, he opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried rose petals, lay a collection of items that made his heart ache with long-suppressed emotions. A faded photograph of a younger Daniel with his arm around a beautiful woman with long, dark hair, Elena. Their smiles were radiant, full of hope and promise. A small, velvet ring box that Daniel knew contained the engagement ring he'd never had the courage to give. Several handwritten letters, the paper yellowed with age, addressed to "My dearest Daniel" in Elena's flowing script. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope with Sarah's handwriting on the front. To be opened when the garden speaks. Daniel's mind reeled. How had Sarah known about this box? About Elena? And why had she kept it hidden all these years, only to leave clues for him to find it now? "Daddy!" Maya's sleepy voice startled him. He turned to see his daughter standing a few feet away, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing? The flowers say you're digging up old hurts." Daniel quickly closed the box, his heart pounding. "It's nothing, sweet pea. Just looking at some old memories." Maya tilted her head, her eyes suddenly sharp and alert. "The big tree says those memories belong to someone named Elena." "Who is she, Daddy?" The innocent question hit Daniel like a physical blow. How could he explain Elena to his daughter when he could barely make sense of it himself? She was someone I knew a long time ago, before I met your mom," Daniel said carefully, his voice thick with emotion. Maya nodded sagely, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "The roses remember her. They say she was sad when she left, but that it had to be that way." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Maya, honey, what else do the plants say about Elena?" The little girl's brow furrowed in concentration. They say she left something important behind. Something that changed everything." Her eyes widened suddenly. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Daniel hadn't even realized tears were streaming down his face. He quickly wiped them away, forcing a smile. "It's okay, sweet pea. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they remember things from long ago." Maya nodded solemnly, then pointed to the box in Daniel's hands. "The plants say there's a letter in there you need to read. They say it will help you understand." With trembling hands, Daniel pulled out the sealed envelope from Sarah. Taking a deep breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, it means the time has come for the truth to be revealed. I've known about Elena since the beginning, about your history, your love, and the sacrifice you both made. What you don't know is that Elena came to see me shortly before our wedding. She told me everything, including the real reason she left. Daniel, there's so much more to this story than you realize. The garden holds the final piece of the puzzle. When you're ready to face the truth, all of it, ask Maya to help you find what's buried beneath the rose bushes. Remember that I have always loved you, and that love is strong enough to withstand even the hardest truths. Forever yours, Sarah." Daniel stared at the letter, his mind spinning. Sarah had known about Elena all along? And what secret could be so monumental that it was buried in their own backyard? He looked up at Maya, who was watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Sweet pea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's time we did some gardening." As they made their way to the rose bushes, the morning mist began to lift, revealing a garden that seemed more alive than ever. The flowers turned their heads to follow their progress, and the leaves rustled with whispered secrets. Daniel realized that he stood on the precipice of a truth that would change everything. whatever lay buried beneath the roses. He knew that unearthing it would alter the course of his life and his understanding of the two women he had loved forever. With Maya by his side, her small hand clasped tightly in his, Daniel prepared to dig up the final secret of the garden. The truth, long buried, was finally ready to bloom. The midday sun beat down on Daniel's back as he knelt beside the rose bushes, sweat beading on his forehead. His hands, once steady and sure, now trembled as he carefully moved aside the rich, dark soil. Maya sat cross-legged nearby, her small fingers gently stroking the leaves of a particularly vibrant rose bush. "They're nervous, Daddy," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The roses say the secret has been sleeping for a long time. They're not sure if it should wake up." Daniel paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. "Sometimes, Sweet Pea," he said carefully, "we have to face difficult truths, even if they scare us." As if in response to his words, Daniel's fingers brushed against something solid. His heart racing, he carefully unearthed a small metal lockbox. It was weathered and rusted, but the lock still held firm. "This is it," he murmured, more to himself than to Maya. "This is what Sarah wanted me to find." With shaking hands, Daniel lifted the box from its earthy bed. It was heavier than he expected, as if the weight of its secrets added physical mass. He turned it over in his hands, searching for a way to open it. "Look, Daddy," Maya said, pointing to the underside of the box. "There are words there." Daniel squinted at the faded engraving. The key lies in the heart of the oak. Of course, he thought, the old oak tree, where this journey had begun. "Come on, Sweet Pea," Daniel said, standing up and brushing the dirt from his knees. "We need to check the oak tree again." As they approached the massive tree, its branches seemed to sway in welcome, despite the still air. Daniel ran his hand along the rough bark, feeling for any irregularities. His fingers caught on something, a small, almost imperceptible seam in the wood. With a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a tarnished key nestled within. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he retrieved the key. It fit perfectly into the lock of the metal box. With a deep breath, he turned it, hearing the mechanism release with a soft click. Inside the box lay a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded ribbon. On top was an envelope addressed to Daniel in Sarah's handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened it and began to read. "My dearest Daniel, by now you've uncovered the truth about Elena. But there's more to the story. A truth I've carried alone for far too long. Elena didn't leave you, Daniel. You sent her away, though you don't remember it. The night of the accident, the night you lost part of your memory, you made a choice. A choice to protect Elena, to give her a chance at the life she deserved, free from the scandal that threatened to engulf you both. The letters in this box will explain everything. They're from Elena, written over the years. She never stopped loving you, Daniel, but she respected your decision. I've known all along. Elena came to me before our wedding, told me everything. I chose to keep this secret, to protect you from the pain of remembering. But now, with Maya's gift awakening the memories in our garden, it's time for you to know the whole truth. Forgive me for keeping this from you. Know that I have always loved you, and that love included all of who you are, even the parts you forgot. With all my heart, Sarah." Daniel stared at the letter, his mind reeling. The accident? He barely remembered it. A patch of ice, a swerving car, then darkness. He'd woken up in the hospital with gaps in his memory, but he'd never imagined. "Daddy," Maya's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Are you okay? The flowers say you're feeling a lot of things all at once." Daniel looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah's eyes looking back at him with concern. How could he explain this to her? How could he reconcile the life he thought he knew with this new, shocking reality? I'm not sure, Sweet Pea," he said honestly. "I think I need some time to read these letters and understand what happened." Maya nodded solemnly. "The old tree says sometimes we have to let the roots grow deep before the truth can blossom. Maybe you should read the letters under his branches. He says he'll keep you safe." Daniel managed a weak smile, marveling at his daughter's wisdom. "That sounds like a good idea, honey. Why don't you go play for a while? Daddy needs some time alone." As Maya skipped off towards her swing set, Daniel settled himself against the trunk of the old oak. With a deep breath, he untied the ribbon and began to read Elena's letters. Hours passed as Daniel immersed himself in a past he'd forgotten. Elena's words painted a picture of forbidden love, of sacrifice and heartache. The scandal that had threatened to destroy them both. The impossible choice he'd made to protect her future. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as the memories came flooding back. The pain of losing Elena, the guilt of sending her away, the accident that had allowed him to forget it all. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Daniel finally looked up from the letters. The world around him seemed different somehow, sharper, more vivid, as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He saw Sarah in a new light, not just as his loving wife, but as a woman of incredible strength and compassion, who had chosen to love him despite knowing his past. And Elena, the love he'd forgotten, the sacrifice he'd made. It all came rushing back, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves of the old oak, Daniel made a decision. It was time to confront the past, to reach out to Elena and finally close this chapter of his life. With a heavy heart but a determined spirit, Daniel gathered the letters and stood up. The garden around him seemed to pulse with energy, as if approving of his choice. "Maya," he called out, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Come inside, sweetie. We need to talk." As his daughter ran towards him, her face alight with innocence and love, Daniel steeled himself for the conversation ahead. It was time to share the truth with Maya, to honor Sarah's memory, and to face the shadows of guilt that had haunted him for so long. The garden whispered its secrets on the evening breeze, a reminder that even the deepest buried truths would eventually find their way to the light. The kitchen was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun as Daniel sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of now-cold coffee. Maya sat across from him, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "Sweetie," Daniel began, his voice rough with emotion. "Remember how we talked about Mommy leaving us messages in the garden?" Maya nodded solemnly. "The flowers say Mommy had lots of secrets, but good secrets, not bad ones." Daniel smiled weakly. "That's right. And now it's time for me to share some of those secrets with you." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "It's about someone named Elena. She is a very important person in my life." As Daniel began to explain, in terms a child could understand, about his past with Elena and the accident that had stolen his memories, Maya listened with an intensity that belied her young age. The kitchen fell silent save for Daniel's voice and the occasional rustle of leaves from the open window, as if the garden itself was listening in. "So, Elena was your girlfriend before Mommy?" Maya asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, and I loved her very much. But something happened, something that made it impossible for us to be together. I chose to send her away to protect her, but then I forgot all about it because of the accident." Maya's eyes widened. "Is that why the roses always sound sad when they talk about her?" A lump formed in Daniel's throat. "Probably, honey. The roses remember things we've forgotten." "But Daddy," Maya said, her voice small, "if you loved Elena, how come you married Mommy?" The innocent question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, memories of Sarah flooding his mind, her kindness, her strength, the depth of her love that had accepted all of him, even the parts he couldn't remember. "I loved your mom very, very much," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew about Elena, about everything, and she loved me anyway. She was an amazing woman, your mother." Maya nodded, a wisdom beyond her years shining in her eyes. "The sunflowers say Mommy's love was as big as the sky. But Daddy," she hesitated, biting her lip. The old oak tree says there's still more. Something about a baby? Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. A baby? Surely that couldn't be right. He'd have known if Elena was pregnant when she left. Wouldn't he? With trembling hands, he reached for the bundle of letters he'd left on the counter. There, at the bottom of the stack, was an envelope he hadn't opened yet. His name was written on it in Elena's handwriting, but it looked different, shaky, as if written in great distress. Daniel tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. As he read, the color drained from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered, the letter slipping from his fingers. "Daddy." Maya's voice seemed to come from far away. "What's wrong? The plants are getting really loud. They say I have a sister." Daniel looked at his daughter, really seeing her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin. How had he never noticed before? Features that he'd always attributed to Sarah. But now, "Maya," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think you might be right." The revelation hung in the air between them, as monumental and life-altering as a bolt of lightning. Daniel's mind raced, trying to process this new information. A daughter. He had another daughter out there somewhere, a child he'd never known about. "We have to find her." "Daddy?" Maya said, her voice filled with a determination that reminded Daniel so much of Sarah. "The garden says she needs us." Daniel nodded, still in shock. "Yes, sweetie, we do. But first..." He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the backyard. The garden seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it too understood the magnitude of this moment. "First, I need to talk to the plants myself," he said, more to himself than to Maya. As he stepped out into the twilight, the grass cool beneath his bare feet, Daniel felt a shift in the air. The leaves rustled with an almost sentient quality, and the flowers seemed to turn their heads towards him. For the first time since Maya had revealed her gift, Daniel allowed himself to truly open up to the possibility. He knelt in the soft earth, placing his palms flat on the ground. "Please," he whispered, feeling slightly foolish but desperate for answers. "If you can hear me, if you've been trying to tell me something all this time, I'm listening now. Help me understand." At first, there was nothing but the normal sounds of a summer evening. But then, carried on a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere, Daniel heard it, a whisper, so faint he might have imagined it, but unmistakably Sarah's voice. "Find her, my love. Find them both. It's time to heal the past and embrace the future." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as the magnitude of everything crashed over him. The lost memories, the sacrifices made, the secrets kept, and now, a daughter he never knew he had. As the last light faded from the sky, Daniel made a vow to the garden, to Sarah's memory, and to himself. He would find Elena and their daughter. He would face the truths he'd forgotten and the consequences of choices made long ago. And somehow, with Maya by his side and the wisdom of the garden to guide them, they would forge a new path forward, one that honored the past while embracing the unexpected future that lay ahead. The confrontation of truths had only just begun, but for the first time in years, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. The soft glow of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold as Daniel sat on the back porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. He hadn't slept, his mind a whirlwind of memories, revelations, and plans. Maya's quiet footsteps broke through his reverie. She padded out onto the porch in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Daddy?" she yawned, climbing into his lap. "Did you talk to the garden all night?" Daniel smiled softly, wrapping an arm around his daughter. "Not all night, sweet pea, but I did a lot of thinking." Maya nodded sagely. "The daisies told me you were out here for a long time. They say you're ready now." "Ready for what, honey?" "To plant new seeds," Maya replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Daniel's heart swelled with a mixture of love and amazement at his daughter's intuition. "You know what? I think you're right." He set his coffee down and stood, lifting Maya with him. How about we do some gardening before breakfast? Maya's face lit up with excitement. Really? Can we plant sunflowers? The roses say we need more sunshine in the garden. As they made their way to the shed to gather supplies, Daniel couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his world had changed. Just days ago, the garden had been a painful reminder of Sarah. Now, it felt like a living connection to both his past and his future. They spent the next hour digging, planting, and watering. Daniel found the work therapeutic, each turn of the soil feeling like he was unearthing more of himself. Maya chattered happily to the plants, her innocence a balm to his troubled soul. As they patted down the soil around the last sunflower seed, Daniel heard the distant rumble of a car engine. He froze, his heart pounding. He'd made the call last night, but he hadn't expected, "Daddy." Maya tugged at his shirt. "Someone's here. The oak tree says it's time." Daniel swallowed hard, brushing dirt from his hands. "Stay here for a moment, sweetie. Okay?" He made his way around the side of the house, his steps faltering as he reached the front yard. There, stepping out of a modest sedan, was a face he'd only just remembered but would never forget. "Elena," he breathed. She stood there, looking both familiar and changed by the years. Her dark hair was shorter now, streaked with elegant strands of silver. But her eyes, those were exactly as he remembered, deep pools of emotion that had once been his whole world. "Daniel," she replied, her voice catching. I got your message. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I'm glad you did," Daniel said, taking a tentative step forward. "There's so much we need to talk about." Elena nodded, her gaze drifting past him to the house. "Is she?" "Maya's in the backyard," Daniel explained. She's extraordinary, Elena, and she knows about everything." A look of panic flashed across Elena's face. "Everything? But how?" Daniel managed a weak smile. "It's a long story, one I think you need to hear. But first," he took a deep breath. "Our daughter, is she?" "She's at a friend's house," Elena said softly. "I didn't want to overwhelm her, or you, until we had a chance to talk." Daniel nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Of course, that makes sense." He gestured towards the house. "Would you like to come in? Or maybe the garden would be better." A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. "The garden. Yes, I think that would be perfect." As they rounded the corner of the house, Maya looked up from her gardening. Her eyes widened as she saw Elena, and without hesitation, she ran towards them. "You're here!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Elena's waist. "The flowers said you would come, but I wasn't sure when." Elena stood frozen for a moment, clearly taken aback by the child's enthusiasm. Then, slowly, she knelt down to Maya's level, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Hello, Maya," she said softly. It's wonderful to meet you." Daniel watched the interaction, his heart aching with a bittersweet mixture of joy and regret. So much lost time, so many missed moments. But as he looked around at the garden, at the new sunflower seeds they just planted, at the old oak tree standing sentinel over it all, he felt a surge of hope. "Why don't we all sit down?" he suggested, gesturing to the bench near the rose bushes. "I think it's time we talked, really talked." As they settled onto the bench, Maya nestled between them. Daniel felt a shift in the air. The leaves rustled gently, and the flowers seemed to turn towards them, as if the entire garden was listening. "I don't even know where to begin," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How about we start with forgiveness?" Daniel replied, reaching out to take her hand. "Forgiveness for the choices we made, for the years we lost. And then we can talk about the future." Maya nodded enthusiastically. "The garden says forgiveness is like water for the roots. It helps new things grow." Elena looked at the child in amazement, then back at Daniel. "She really can?" Daniel smiled, squeezing Elena's hand. "Like I said, it's a long story, but we have time now. Time to share our stories, to heal old wounds, and to plant new beginnings." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm rays caressing the newly turned soil, Daniel, Elena, and Maya began to talk. Words flowed like a gentle stream, washing away years of pain and misunderstanding. Tears were shed, laughter was shared, and slowly, the tangled roots of their past began to straighten and strengthen. In that moment, surrounded by the whispers of the garden and the love of family both old and new, Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The journey ahead would not be easy, but as he looked at Elena and Maya, he knew that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The garden had led them to this moment of forgiveness and new beginnings. Now, it was up to them to nurture the seeds they'd planted and watch as a new future bloomed. The soft golden light of a late summer afternoon filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree, casting dappled shadows across the lush garden. Daniel stood on the back porch, his salt and pepper hair ruffled by a gentle breeze, watching the scene before him with a heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. In the center of the yard, Maya, now a poised young woman of 20, knelt beside a bed of vibrant sunflowers. Her slender fingers gently caressed the petals as she whispered words too soft for Daniel to hear. Beside her, a girl of 13 with Elena's dark hair and Daniel's eyes listened intently, her face a mixture of wonder and concentration. "Lily," Maya said, loud enough for Daniel to catch, "can you hear what the sunflowers are saying?" Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. I think so. It's like a soft hum, but I can almost make out words." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. After all these years, the garden's magic still had the power to amaze him. "You're doing great, sweetheart," came Elena's voice as she emerged from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade. She caught Daniel's eye and smiled, the years having softened the edges of their complicated past into something beautiful and strong. As Elena set the tray on the patio table, Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I still can't believe it sometimes," he murmured. "All of this, it feels like a dream." Elena leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "A dream we almost lost," she said softly. "But the garden, it knew. It kept our secrets safe until we were ready to face them." Daniel nodded, remembering the tumultuous days that followed Elena's return. The shock of meeting Lily for the first time, the careful explanations to friends and neighbors, the delicate process of blending their fractured family into something whole and beautiful. It hadn't been easy. There had been tears, arguments, moments of doubt. But through it all, the garden had been their constant, a living reminder of the love that had brought them together and the strength that kept them united. "Mom, Dad," Maya called out, waving them over. "Come quick. I think Lily's starting to really hear the flowers." Hand in hand, Daniel and Elena made their way across the lawn. As they approached, Lily looked up, her eyes wide with excitement. "I can hear them," she exclaimed. "The sunflowers, they're singing, and the roses. Oh, the roses are telling me about the day you and Mom got married here in the garden." Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. The memory of that day, a small, intimate ceremony right here among the blooms that had witnessed so much of their story, was one he cherished deeply. "What else do they say, sweetie?" Elena asked, kneeling down beside her daughters. Lily closed her eyes, concentrating. "They're talking about Grandma Sarah. They say she's happy, that her love is still here in every petal and leaf." Daniel's heart swelled with emotion. Even now, years after her passing, Sarah's presence was a tangible force in their lives. Her love, her sacrifice, her unwavering belief in the power of forgiveness. It was all woven into the very fabric of their family. "The oak tree," Maya added, her voice soft with reverence, "says that our roots run deep, intertwined with the earth and with each other. It says that love, like the seasons, goes through cycles of growth and rest, but it never truly dies." As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the family settled on the soft grass beneath the oak tree. Daniel looked around at the faces of his loved ones, Elena, her hand clasped in his. Maya, wise beyond her years, Lily, just beginning to discover the magic that ran in her blood. He thought of all the twists and turns that had led them to this moment. The pain, the loss, the forgotten memories, and the rediscovered love. Through it all, the garden had been their constant, a silent witness to their struggles and triumphs. As if reading his thoughts, Elena squeezed his hand. "You know," she said softly, "I think Sarah knew all along that this is how it would end up. That's why she left those clues, why she nurtured Maya's gift." Daniel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "She always did see the bigger picture, even when I couldn't. The flowers say Grandma Sarah's love is like sunshine." Lily piped up, her young face serious. "It helps us grow, even when we can't see it." "That's right, sweetheart," Daniel said, pulling her close. "And we'll keep growing, keep learning, keep loving. That's the legacy she left us. That's the story this garden will always tell." As the first stars began to twinkle in the deepening twilight, a warm breeze rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree. To Daniel, it sounded almost like a contented sigh, as if the garden itself was settling in for the night, satisfied with the growth and healing it had witnessed. In that moment, surrounded by the love of his family and the whispers of the garden, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and often difficult, but here, in this place where secrets had bloomed into truths and lost love had been rediscovered, he knew they had finally found their way home. As Maya began to softly hum a lullaby, one that Sarah used to sing, Daniel realized with a start. He closed his eyes and sent a silent thank you to the garden, to Sarah, and to the mysterious forces that had guided them all to this moment of perfect harmony. The silent legacy of love, forgiveness, and growth would continue, passed down through generations, whispered on the breeze and nurtured in the rich soil of their extraordinary garden. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.